You must love podcasts if you're listening to this. Do you want to start your own one or you already have one? Then follow Smarter Podcasting to get expert advice from me, Niall Mackay, the podcast guy. Since 2019, we've worked with over 40 podcasters, produced over 700 episodes, and helped many podcasts get to the top of the Apple Podcast charts. And right now, I'm offering you a professional edit for just $27. Click the link in the show notes. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming out. This is an incredible audience. So my name's Niall Mackay, the podcast guy. I've been here in Saigon for 8 years. And Zach has asked me to share my story of how I went from starting my own podcast about Vietnam to running my own end-to-end podcast production agency. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So back in 2019, I'd been a massive podcast fan for many years, and I was bold one day, so I decided that I was going to start my own podcast about Saigon. Now, I wanted to get to know people here in Saigon. I wanted to know their real stories. So lots of you have probably met someone that has a really interesting story, but most people don't know about it. Now, I was an English teacher, and I met lots of English teachers who would introduce themselves as just a teacher. And that really frustrated me because nobody is just a teacher. For one, you're teaching somebody a skill, whether it's English or a subject. That's an amazing thing. So nobody's just a teacher. But also lots of these people had really, really interesting stories. And I wanted to share those stories with people. I wanted to get to know the people that lived in Saigon. So I'd read an article in VN Express saying how many motorbikes were in Saigon. There were 7.3 million motorbikes in a city of just 9 or 10 million people. So I thought it was a funny name. I called the podcast 7 Million Bikes, a Saigon podcast. I got a really shitty microphone. I invited people over to my front room, and I started talking to people, and I just wanted to find out more about them and share their story. Now, when I started, I didn't really have any expectations. To be honest, I thought 15 people would listen to it, and that would be amazing. 15 people are going to listen to my podcast. That's so cool. Thankfully, I got quite a few more listeners than that right away from the beginning. And if anyone else here does YouTube or does podcasts, you'll know what it's like. You sit and you just keep refreshing the button, just watching the numbers go up, 1 every 5 minutes, 2, you're like, oh my God. So I did that in the beginning nearly every day. And it was one of the best things that I ever did. I got to know so many people. I got to share so many stories. And after a year or two, I realized that the name wasn't really helpful. For one, 7 million bikes. Nobody really knew what it meant. It didn't describe the podcast. It didn't say what it was about. And also, the podcast was called a Saigon podcast. By now, I was starting to interview people across the country and actually across the world who were all connected to Vietnam. So I made a big decision. I decided to change the name of the podcast to a Vietnam podcast. And at the time, I was running events, not as good as Zach. This is an incredible event. But I was running events. We did some networking events that we met at. I was doing comedy shows. Some people maybe might know me. I used to do stand-up comedy. I was running comedy events. I even was starting to put on some music events and quiz nights as well. So things were going really well. And I decided that 7 Million Bikes was the overall brand for everything that we did. Comedy, podcast, events. And everything was going great. 2019, things were awesome. Everyone remembers 2019. And I got my dream job. My dream job, I work in fundraising for charities. So my job is to raise money to help people. And I got a job here in Saigon to help raise money for underprivileged children to give them education. And in my first year, we set a target to raise $70,000 to build a school in the Mekong Delta for children. And we raised that money. And it was one of the best moments of my life was to go down to the Mekong Delta and watch the kids go to that school for the first time and see their faces and how happy they were. So, 2019, I was doing my dream job. helping give underprivileged children education. And the business was going really well. It was like a side hustle. I was starting to do more shows. The podcast was going well. And then, as we all know, 2020 happened. I'm going to come and join the guys at the back. So 2020 happened. And we all know what happened in 2020, right? We were planning to raise money, raise another $70,000 to build another school. And then we all know what happened in March 2020. COVID hit, right? So the world changed dramatically. I went from doing my dream job, raising money to help children, to reducing my hours and having to teach more because the school couldn't bring in any teachers. And that was fine. We all needed to do what we needed to do. By the end of 2020, I asked if they were going to renew my contract, and unfortunately they said no. They weren't going to be able to fund the program anymore because of the amount of money that they'd lost because of COVID. So they gave me 3 options. They said you can become an like an academic manager, you can become a full-time teacher, or a part-time teacher. Now I see this is one of the biggest sliding doors moments in my life. I had to sit down and talk to my wife. I said, you know, the company's starting to do really well. We're doing more events, we're doing more comedy shows, and we're doing more podcasts. What should I do? And so it was at that moment we made the decision that we were going to start the business and concentrate on that, and I was going to become a part-time English teacher. So fast forward through 2021, the business is starting to pick up. I'm doing podcasts, I'm doing comedy shows, I'm doing events. I'm about to sign the biggest contract of my life. Everything's going well. And then suddenly June comes around, and for those who are here, June 2021 was when we went into the big lockdown, right? Where we all ended up in our apartments and couldn't leave. So things got really bad. And so I couldn't do anything that I'd been doing before. We came out of lockdown, we moved forward, goes into 2022. And I'm just trying to survive. By this point, I've lost my job, my business isn't doing well, and I'm doing so much just to try and make a living, to try and keep things going. And at one point in 2022, I counted, I was doing 8 different gigs at one point. I was just running from one to the next. I was doing comedy shows, I was teaching still, I was doing public school teaching, I was making TikTok videos. I've never made TikTok videos in my life, but somehow I did that job. I did an acting gig. I've never done acting in my life. I mean, it's called acting, but it was literally just standing forward, but I did that for 10 hours. I was doing so many different things, and so many people were giving me compliments, like, Neil, that's amazing, you're doing so much. And then I realized I wasn't doing anything well. I was doing lots of things, but I was doing them all badly, and I wasn't making any money. So there was so many challenges that I had to overcome. And then it got to January 2023. I went back to America with my wife. My wife is from America. And that was when I had a bit of a chance to reevaluate where I was at. And I realized I was doing too much. I was saying yes to everything, and I was succeeding at nothing. And I thought, what is it that you really want to do? What is your number one goal? And my number one goal was to help people make podcasts, to help share stories. So when I came back from America, I had a couple of big things that came to me. Because I've heard this advice on so many podcasts, I've read it in so many books, that you need to start saying no. It's one of the best pieces of advice that you can get. I realized that I needed to stop saying yes to everything that came my way, thinking that I could fit it in and do a good job in everything, and I needed to start saying no. And that's one of the most difficult things to do, especially when you've got no money and people want to pay you to do something. So I decided I'm going to start saying no. I'm going to focus on podcasts only. So I reduced my teaching hours. I stopped making TikTok videos. I stopped doing stand-up comedy. I stopped running shows. I stopped running events. I cut back on everything to focus on one thing. And it was at the same time as well, I realized that I had forgotten something that I know works. And we all know this works. And it's setting goals. I needed to go back and set goals. Because of everything with COVID, I hadn't set a goal for 3 years because we're all just trying to survive, right? And I was like, I have to set a goal. So I set smarter goals. Everyone knows what smarter goals are. If you don't, go Google it. But I set some smarter goals. I started to say no to stuff, and things changed almost immediately. When I decided I was going to focus on one thing, and that one thing was podcast, I immediately started getting more business. I started to grow my team, and I started to achieve what I set out to achieve. Fast forward since then, which was only 2023. So it's been a long journey. I started in 2019, but things really only started kicking off in 2023. Since then, we now have a small team of 4 people around the world working on their own schedule, on their own time. We have people in the Philippines, in Singapore, and here in Saigon as well. And this year has surpassed all expectations. So as you can see, Podfest, which is one of the biggest podcast conferences in the world, decided that they were going to do their first conference in Asia, in the Philippines, and they were looking for speakers. So I decided to put myself forward, and thankfully I was accepted, and I was the first ever speaker at Podfest Asia in the Philippines. So that was incredible. I talked about how to edit a podcast. Thank you very much. Then I'm a member of the British Chamber of Commerce, and we actually helped produce the British Chamber of Commerce podcast. Completely unrelated, at the Brit Channel Awards this year, 7 Million Bikes Podcast won the best or great company for the amount of work that we do helping produce podcasts that share Vietnam stories and share what Vietnam does and how amazing it is here. So that was absolutely mind-blowing. Yeah, thank you very much. And then just last month, we found out that we won the best interview podcast in Asia, and I was the best audio producer in Asia as well. Thank you very much. As shy as you can see by my typing mistake there. So these awards, I know they obviously make you feel good, but it was more a validation of everything that I'd been through, everything that the company had been through, everything that we'd done to come to this was absolutely incredible. So the growth has been unreal because we decided to focus on one thing, say no, and set goals. And if I could give everyone here one advice in your journey, whatever you're doing in a content creator, it would be this exact same 3 things that I've said to you. Have the confidence to say no. It does take a lot. It took me so much to have the confidence to be able to tell people, no, I don't want to do that, especially when they're offering you money. But set your goals. This is my advice. Set smarter goals. And every single day, check your goals and ask yourself, am I doing something today to achieve that goal? So if you start to say yes to something that doesn't achieve your goal, then you shouldn't do it. So my example was comedy. It took me so long to set up a comedy show and perform. And eventually I realized this is not helping my goal. So set goals, start saying no, and you will see a massive, massive difference almost immediately. If anyone has any questions, then please raise your hand.
What's the social media channel you use most and most profitable?
Thank you, that is a good question. What's the social media channel I use the most? I'm actually terrible at social media. I'm absolutely awful at social media. But this year, I've started using LinkedIn more, which is a social media channel, and that has been the biggest game changer for me, is using LinkedIn, because I want to build the business. So Instagram, Facebook, I still use them. To be honest, they don't lead to any business for me. LinkedIn, I connect with people every day, and it leads to meetings, and it leads to business. So LinkedIn is the best social media channel if you want to build your business. Thank you very much.
Is better on the way you monetize, or do you have other monetization methods?
So that's a good question. So about a year ago or 2 years ago, I realized to monetize a podcast is really difficult. Only the top 1 to 5% of podcasts in the whole world can really monetize. So I made the decision that the best way to make money is to make podcasts for other people. So that's why I started a podcast production agency. And when I made that decision, I started making money. It's way easier to make money charging other people to do what you're good at. And the other thing I realized over the years of doing it, thanks to my wife, she was like, you know a lot, right? And I was like, no, it's just making a podcast. I don't know that much. And she's like, you know a lot. So whatever you do right now, just remember you're building skills that somebody doesn't have, and you can sell those skills to that person. So the quickest way to monetization is selling what you know.
practical questions better. I'm also a YouTube creator,
Yeah.
YouTuber. So how much, what's the maximum money you make in a month sometimes? Show us the numbers.
So if you didn't hear that, what's the maximum money I make in a month? That's a difficult question to answer, but I'll tell you now I'm putting out proposals which are up to $40,000. So that's just to give you an idea of the potential out there. Thank you very much. Guys, thank you very much. I'm going to hand you back to Zach. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So Neil gave us a lot about his story, going from humble beginnings to great success. And I love the last question about how much money he was making. That's actually one of the interesting parts about being a content creator, is you want to actually make a living doing this. Thank you so much, Neil.
Hi, my name is Sal Jeffries. I run the Mindset, Mood and Movement podcasts. I've been working with Neil at 7 Million Bikes for the whole of this year, literally from the start of my podcast to date. And I want to say a couple of things. So when we record the podcast, sometimes there are things that I need tweaking. There could be edits or clips. It's really simple. I give those instructions to Neil, he gets it sorted. There's sometimes a sound level differences between the guest mic and mine. Again, that's all sorted so the outcome is a really balanced sound. And also if there are issues with voice, little kind of sound interruptions, all those things that can distract a listener, Neil knows exactly what to do, cleans it up. The end result, a highly professional, beautiful sounding podcast without distraction. That's exactly what I want. I know my listeners do. So if you're interested in having that level of podcast and that kind of quality, Neil is a great guy and I highly recommend you speak to him.